I don't want to overread this. There's obviously questions. Teachers are on a 190-day work calendar. Other folks are 250. So there's questions about how do you value that 60 days of extra vacation a year that they get. But the point is that A, we actually spend a lot of money on education. B, we've spent most of that money to go for quantity, not quality. And C, even so, we're offering a relatively attractive salary to folks who want to be in a non-competitive, not overly arduous line of work, even though it's obviously not nearly enough money to keep highly talented, highly desirable folks in that sector. All right. One final thing business community has been lugged into, not only arguing for more money, not only arguing for more pay, not only arguing for smaller class sizes, but also business community has been roped into programs to help require more folks to go through schools of education and get credentialing before they're allowed to teach. Problem with this is that we're incredibly bad at figuring out who's going to be a good teacher before they're actually in the classroom. If you load into predictive equations everything you can about teachers, whether they're credentialed, about their education, about their test scores in terms of their verbal score and stuff, you can explain 3% of teacher-to-teacher variability in student performance on student assessments. So we know that there's huge variation from one teacher to the next, but we can't explain 97% of it until teachers are actually in the classroom, which would seem to make the case for being more flexible about hiring and then being more diligent about making sure we're making good decisions once folks are in the classroom. Too often, business community has played a different role. All right, third, business community has been roped into being a champion for testing and assessment. And I'm a big fan of testing and assessment, don't get me wrong. And I'm not a big fan of testing because it's diagnostically useful. I'm a big fan of testing because it lets you be mean. I want to fire people who are bad at their jobs. I don't think they should be in classrooms with kids. But just like in any of your enterprises, testing and assessment are only useful if they actually measure the things that you care about, if they're accurate. Stupid, inaccurate assessments and tests are not good management tools. Well, right here, we've got under No Child Left Behind, for instance, which required states to adopt testing and assessment in grades 3 to 8 reading and math, and then again in high school. We actually allowed states to define what constitutes proficiency. And the feds then said you had to punish schools which were not making proficiency. Problem is, here's South Carolina and Massachusetts. What this little line represents is the difference between the percentage of kids that were proficient on their test and the percentage of kids that were proficient on our only national test, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Massachusetts led the country on NAEP in 4th grade reading this year. They had about 46% of their kids were proficient according to NAEP, which was best in the country. And they were telling folks that about 51% of their kids were proficient. You could think of this as a truth in advertising line. Tennessee, on the other hand, I would much rather run for re-election as the governor of Tennessee. Because even though on the NAEP only 19% of Tennessee 4th graders could read proficiently, Tennessee was able to inform parents that 81% of their kids were proficient. Because Tennessee had the foresight to come up with a really low bar. Dumb assessments, dumb tests don't help, they hurt. They encourage people to lie and they create cynicism. Kentucky's right in here in the middle. Whatever you're being told by the state is the proficient level in your kids' schools, probably inflated by about 30 points. So subtract 30, and then you'll probably be reasonably in the ballpark of the number of kids who can actually read at 4th grade. Another problem with dumb test construction is right here. They're error-ridden. Using Florida data, a couple of buddies of mine at Harvard, Paul Peterson and Marty West, pointed out that if your school failed to make adequate yearly progress under No Child Left Behind, 29% chance in math it was outperforming schools that were making adequate yearly progress. 28% when it came to reading. How comfortable would you be using a quality control mechanism which you knew was going to be systematically wrong 1/4 to 1/3 of the time? And how comfortable would your employees be being evaluated with a metric which you knew was going to be used for retention and termination decisions, which you told them up front in black and white was accurate 2 times out of 3. It doesn't have to be this way, of course. Florida's own approach, which actually focuses on how much kids are learning during the year, the value-added model, is 94% accuracy when you compare A schools to F schools in math, and 97% accuracy when you're doing it in reading. I got to tell you, as a former teacher, I'm much more comfortable with a 3 or a 5% error rate than I am with a 28 or 29% error rate. All right, perhaps not shockingly, given a variety of problems with its design, if you look at the era before, during, and after No Child Left Behind, for all of the time and energy the U.S. Business and Commerce and state affiliates have put into this push, it's hard to identify any obvious difference that all of this sweat and tussle and energy have made. All right, so what to make of all this? 5 things. What business needs to do is stop being nice, being Clark Kent. It needs to stop going to school districts and saying, tell us how much more stuff you'd like us to help you get. And it needs to stop being signed up for some ideologue's reform agenda. Business needs to bring to education the things that business knows about. Common sense. How do you make good cost-benefit decisions? How do you think about back-office systems? And how do you make tough decisions in which you're judging what's going to work? So 5 things I want to talk about. First, business needs to help schools manage smart. If you've not spent a lot of time with your school district, have somebody from your organization go. It is an informative experience. Washington, D.C. has 39 data systems acquired over a period of 30 years. 20 of the 39 don't talk to each other. If they want to know what the attendance rate is on children who are under the Department of Youth Services, they have somebody in the office sit down, call up a spreadsheet, and start taking handwritten notes off the Youth Services Excel spreadsheet. They then, from those handwritten notes, start typing them into a file, which they cannot merge, of course, with the attendance file because they're not compatible. So it takes 4 or 5 days to actually get an analysis of which kids in youth services are actually showing up. This isn't smart stuff. Michelle Rhee, the chancellor of D.C., had the brilliant notion 2 years ago that if parents in low-performing schools knew how their kids were doing, it might help them be better advocates for their kids. She thought an interesting thing to start with would be to tell the parents whether the kids were in school that day. This is why they call Michelle a visionary in education. Right? This is why she's on the cover of Newsweek, because she has these kinds of crazy ideas. Well, problem was, it takes 8 days in Washington, D.C. schools, 8 business days, for the district to actually make available the highly secret information of whether a child was in school. Because a teacher has to put the sticky on a Scantron sheet, hang it on the door, somebody from the office has to come collect it, it has to sit in the office for a couple days until somebody from downtown comes and collects it. They have to drive it back to downtown. It has to sit into a stack until it is individually hand-scanned in, it is cleaned, and then finally made available. Yeah, you guys just heard from UPS, I believe. I don't think that's the way they do business. Maybe in 1925. Well, somebody on Michelle's team had a rocket science idea. They said they've heard of this thing called a laptop computer. They said, why don't we have teachers take attendance on the laptop computer at the 3 pilot schools? And then we can upload it to the mainframe and parents can get attendance data same day. Problem is, Washington Teacher Union pointed out that it is a permissible job duty to require that teachers take attendance. It is not a permissible job duty, however, under the contract, to require that teachers do data entry. You know what? This is a problem. Now, it took them 12 weeks. They got a workaround on this. So there's now 3 schools in D.C. where they're doing this stuff. But these are the kinds of things that folks in schools live with every day. Sacramento went bankrupt 10 years ago because they were spending money out of one account, which actually wasn't linked to their state revenues. They spent $37 million before they realized it. Whoops.